you quietly limit yourself. A life can't rise above the identity carrying it. You can rearrange habits, surroundings, even ambitions, but unless the person inside shifts, nothing in the outer world truly moves. We live up to the picture we hold of ourselves, not the picture we hold of our dreams. You can want more, try harder, push longer, but you will always eventually return to the boundaries drawn by your self-image. Identity is the quiet architect of destiny. It doesn't shout, it doesn't argue, it doesn't force. It simply decides what feels natural for you, and your life follows that feeling without resistance. You can see this in ordinary moments. Some people walk into a challenge believing, "I belong here." Others walk in feeling like strangers to their own potential. Same situation, different identity, wildly different outcomes. Your identity is the lens through which you interpret everything: success, failure, opportunity, rejection, effort, possibility. And that interpretation determines your actions long before you realize it. A person who sees themselves as capable tries, learns, adjusts. A person who sees themselves as inadequate retreats, hesitates, and doubts. Not because reality is different, but because their self-image is. Identity is powerful because it works beneath awareness. You rarely notice it guiding you. It shapes your voice, the way you stand, what you attempt, what you avoid, what you tolerate, and what you quietly believe you deserve. Identity often decides your future more accurately than your talent. A talented person with a weak identity shrinks. An average person with a strong identity rises, not because one has more ability, but because one has a stronger inner permission to grow. Most people try to change their life by adjusting the surface: new habits, new goals, new routines. They keep polishing the outer structure while the inner foundation remains unchanged. They forget the simplest truth of human behavior. You cannot act consistently in a way that contradicts your identity. You can force effort for a while, but identity will always pull you back to what feels familiar, even if that familiarity is limiting. This is why so many changes fade, why new habits crumble, why goals lose momentum, why progress disappears the moment enthusiasm wears off, because the outer effort shifted, but the inner identity stayed the same. Identity is not loud, but it is firm. It decides what feels normal for you, and you rarely rise above what feels normal. Identity is not fixed. It is built, quietly, gradually, through the thoughts you accept, the self-talk you repeat, the standards you choose, and the image you allow yourself to hold. The moment your identity changes, your life begins to respond. Not instantly, not dramatically, but steadily, with a new direction. A small shift inside becomes a noticeable shift outside. Why? Because identity guides attention. Attention guides action, and action shapes destiny. Your future isn't decided by fate, it's decided by the person you allow yourself to be. If you want a new life, you don't start with habits, you start with self-image. And the question that quietly sits at the heart of every achievement is not, "What do you want?" but, "Who do you believe yourself to be?" Because your life will rise, or fall, to meet the answer. How your self-image shapes your limits, possibilities, and direction. You never behave beyond the borders of the person you believe yourself to be. Your self-image is the quiet map you follow, often without realizing it. It decides what feels possible, what feels difficult, and what feels out of reach, not because reality demands those limits, but because identity does. A person who sees themselves as capable doesn't need perfect conditions to act. They move because action feels natural to them. They try because learning feels natural to them, and they persist because progress feels natural to them. But a person who sees themselves as unprepared, unqualified, or not the kind who succeeds will hesitate even when the path is open. Their feet stop where their identity stops. Your self-image is not just a picture, it's a boundary line. You may never say it aloud, but inside, every identity carries quiet rules. I go this far. I can handle this much. This is my level. This is what people like me can or cannot do. Those rules shape your life more than any external barrier ever will. You've experienced this before. Think of a time when you were given an opportunity and your first reaction wasn't excitement. It was discomfort, not because the opportunity was wrong, but because it didn't match the version of yourself you were used to carrying. We reject more possibilities due to identity conflict than due to actual difficulty. You can stretch your goals all you want, but if your identity stays small, your actions will shrink back to match it. This is why two people with equal skill can live entirely different lives. One sees themselves as someone who belongs in the room, so they step forward. The other sees themselves as someone who should stay quiet, so they never raise their hand. The difference isn't talent, it's self-permission. Identity shapes direction too. If you see yourself as someone who grows, you naturally look for challenges that build you. If you see yourself as someone who struggles, you unconsciously look for signs that confirm that belief. The mind always tries to keep your life consistent with the image you carry inside, not because it wants to limit you, but because it wants to avoid inner conflict. You do not rise to your goals, you rise to your self-image. You can push against your limits for a while. You can run on enthusiasm for a season, but unless your inner identity expands, you will always return to what feels familiar. Identity decides how high you aim, how long you stay, how quickly you give up, and how much you believe you deserve. It quietly tells you which doors to knock on, which chances to take, and which paths to abandon before even trying. When people say, "I feel stuck," it's rarely the world holding them back. It's the self-image they haven't questioned. Identity also shapes possibility. When you begin to see yourself differently, even slightly, the world seems to rearrange itself. You notice ideas you ignored before. You act in ways you previously avoided. You carry yourself with a posture that new opportunities recognize. Nothing outside changed. You did, and life simply responded. Your self-image is the starting point of every success and every limitation, not because your identity is destiny, but because identity is the foundation upon which destiny is built. If you want a different direction, a larger life, a wider horizon, you begin not with action, but with the person you believe yourself to be. Why habits fail? When identity stays the same. You can change a habit for a few days. You can push yourself into a new routine for a few weeks. You can force discipline for a season. But unless your identity shifts, every new behavior eventually grows heavy. And you slide back into the person you secretly believe yourself to be. Habits do not fail because they are difficult. They fail because they don't match the person performing them. When you try to add a new habit without changing your identity, it feels like wearing clothes that don't quite fit. You can put them on, but you never feel at home in them, and sooner or later, you return to what feels comfortable, even if that comfort has been holding you back. Identity is the silent thermostat of behavior. No matter how high you crank your goals, you will always drift back to whatever level your self-image is set to. You've seen this play out before in your own life. Maybe you told yourself, "I'm going to wake up early," or "I'm finally getting organized," or "I'm going to take my work seriously now." And for a few days, you did. Then life felt heavy again. Motivation loosened. Old patterns returned like a familiar routine. It wasn't laziness, it was identity. The habit was new, but the person performing it was old. Identity always tries to protect what feels normal. If you see yourself as disorganized, a clean desk will feel strange. If you see yourself as someone who struggles with discipline, a consistent routine will feel unnatural. If you see yourself as someone who never finishes things, momentum will feel unfamiliar, almost suspicious. So the mind subtly nudges you back into alignment with the older identity, not because you want to fail, but because identity seeks familiarity. It wants your life to match the internal picture you've carried for years. This is why habits crumble without inner transformation. Habits demand one thing: repetition. Identity controls repetition. If the identity doesn't support the new habit, the repetition collapses. People often think the problem is lack of willpower, but the real struggle is lack of identity alignment. Willpower can lift you for a moment. Identity carries you for a lifetime. When identity doesn't shift, habits require constant emotional effort. Every day feels like pushing against a current. Every task feels heavier than it should. Every attempt at improvement feels temporary. But when identity does shift, the same habit becomes natural, almost automatic, because now you're not forcing yourself to act like a different person. You're becoming the kind of person who naturally does those things. A runner doesn't need motivation to put on their shoes. It feels like who they are. A disciplined person doesn't wrestle with routines. Consistency feels normal. A confident person doesn't struggle to speak up. It matches their self-image. Identity makes the habit fit. This is why the deepest form of change begins inside. Not with rules or routines, but with a new internal story. This is who I am becoming. This is the kind of person I am now. This behavior belongs to me. The moment your identity begins to shift, even slightly, your habits gain an anchor. They stop floating away the moment life gets stressful. They stop relying on emotional highs. They begin to feel like natural extensions of your inner world. Habits don't build identity. Identity holds habits in place. And once the identity matches the behavior lasts. How to build an identity aligned with your goals. Identity doesn't change through pressure. It doesn't change through dramatic declarations or emotional highs. Identity changes the same way a tree grows, quietly, steadily, root first. If you want a new identity, you don't shout it into existence. You build it, one small choice at a time, until your mind has no reason to doubt who you've become. And it begins with something simple. Decide who you intend to be, not what you intend to achieve. Most people set goals based on outcomes. I want this result. I want that success. But identity building asks a deeper question. Who must I become for this result to make sense? A goal without a matching identity creates constant friction, but a goal that grows out of identity becomes a natural direction. Instead of saying, I want to be successful, you say, I'm becoming someone who handles responsibilities well. Instead of, I want to get healthy, you shift to, I'm becoming someone who honors their body. Identity gives the goal a place to live. Attach your new identity to small, repeatable actions. Identity doesn't grow from big gestures. It grows from consistent signals. If you want to see yourself as disciplined, don't wait for huge acts of willpower. Take one small action at the same time each day. Your mind notices consistency more than intensity. If you want to become confident, start speaking clearly in small conversations. Identity grows from repetition, not performance. Use evidence, not imagination. Telling yourself you're a new person isn't enough. Your mind believes what it sees, not what it hears. Each time you follow through on a small promise, your mind collects evidence. This behavior fits me. This action belongs to me. This identity is real. It's the repetition of evidence that slowly rewrites the inner picture. Remove identities that no longer serve you. Old identities cling quietly. I'm the kind who procrastinates. I'm just not organized. I don't handle pressure well. These statements feel innocent, but they act as contracts. You don't break them by force. You break them by refusing to repeat them. Stop telling the story that limits you. Your mind listens to every word. Build identity through alignment, not perfection. You don't need to act like the new identity every moment. What matters is direction. If your actions line up with your emerging identity more often than they don't, your mind begins to shift. Identity isn't a switch, it's a scale. Each aligned action places another weight on the side you're trying to grow into. Let the identity mature before demanding the results. A common mistake is expecting instant transformation, but identity takes time. It needs quiet repetition. It needs room to settle. Once the identity is strong, the results come naturally, almost inevitably, because behavior follows identity the way water follows gravity. 7. Ask yourself one anchoring question each day. What would the person I'm becoming do right now? Not the person you used to be, not the person you're afraid you are, the person you're becoming. This question bypasses emotion and goes straight to identity. It pulls you forward gently, without force. You begin acting in ways that reflect the new identity, and with each action, the new identity feels more real. Build identity in silence, not announcement. The strongest transformations aren't public, they're private. You don't need approval. You don't need applause. You don't need anyone else to understand the shift happening inside you. Identity grows best without the pressure of spectators. In time, the world will see the change on its own, because identity expresses itself through choices, posture, tone, and consistency. When you build identity from the inside out, your goals stop feeling distant, your habits stop feeling forced, your path becomes clearer, and your future becomes something you shape calmly instead of chase anxiously, because you're no longer trying to reach success. You're becoming the person success naturally belongs to. The psychology behind lasting personal transformation. Lasting change doesn't begin with force. It doesn't begin with a surge of motivation or a sudden dramatic decision. Real transformation begins deeper, in the quiet mechanics of the mind, where identity, belief, and behavior quietly negotiate with one another. If you understand this inner process, you'll understand why some changes stick and why others fade like a spark in the wind. There is a simple psychological pattern that governs transformation. Identity, belief, behavior, evidence, reinforced identity. Most people try to start at the behavior step. They change what they do, hoping it will change who they are. And although it works for a short time, the mind eventually rejects any behavior that doesn't match the identity underneath. The mind demands internal consistency. It would rather keep you limited than confused. Identity sets the boundaries of behavior. The mind always acts to protect the version of you that feels familiar. Whether that version is confident or doubtful, disciplined or chaotic, the mind tries to maintain it, not because it prefers it, but because it knows it. Psychologically, familiarity feels safe, even if it's holding you back. This is why you can want a new life yet keep slipping back into the same patterns. You're trying to build a new structure on an old foundation. Belief is the bridge between identity and action. Before every action, there is a belief, usually a quiet one. I can handle this. This is too much. I'm capable. I'm not ready. These small beliefs decide the quality of every choice you make, and those beliefs come directly from your identity. If your identity says, "I'm someone who never finishes things," your belief will reflect that, and your behavior will follow the belief. Behavior follows belief automatically. You don't think your way into behavior, you behave your way into evidence. A person who believes they can learn something new will naturally attempt it without needing emotional fireworks. A person who believes they can't will hesitate, avoid, or abandon the task quickly. Behavior is the visible expression of invisible belief. Evidence reshapes identity, slowly but powerfully. This is the key to lasting transformation. Every small action gives your mind evidence about who you are becoming. Keep a promise to yourself once, and you have one piece of evidence. Do it again, and you have two. Do it 10 times, and a pattern begins forming. Your mind starts saying, "This is who I am now." Identity begins shifting, not through emotion, but through repetition of evidence. Transformation doesn't feel dramatic. It feels familiar. People imagine transformation as lightning, sudden, loud, unmistakable. But real transformation feels more like sunrise, gradual, steady, unnoticed, until suddenly the whole landscape looks different. You don't wake up one day feeling like a new person. You wake up realizing you've been living like one for a while. The mind accepts the identity you prove, not the identity you declare. You can tell yourself, "I'm confident," but if your actions contradict that identity every day, the mind rejects it. You can whisper, "I'm disciplined," but if your behavior provides no evidence, the identity has no reason to grow. Identity is shaped by one thing: repeated alignment between what you do and who you claim to be. Lasting transformation is a negotiation, not a battle. You don't fight your old identity. You let it fade, and you let it fade by feeding the new one, patiently, quietly, with consistent evidence. Over time, the old self shrinks from lack of attention. The new self grows from nourishment. This is the psychology behind every real transformation in human history. Not force, not inspiration, but alignment, a gradual agreement between identity, belief, action, and evidence. And once all four align, your transformation becomes permanent. How identity, destiny, and achievement are connects. We become what we think about, not what we wish for, not what we talk about, not what we dream in private, but what we consistently hold in our mind. That single line is the bridge between identity and destiny. Because what you think about most often becomes the foundation of your self-image, and your self-image becomes the compass that guides your entire life. Your outer results are always the echo of your inner picture. You cannot live far beyond the image you carry of yourself, because every decision, every habit, every response bends itself around that image. Identity, in his view, wasn't just personal, it was directional. It didn't just describe who you were, it predicted where you were going. Identity determines your interpretation of the world. The way you see yourself determines the meaning you attach to everything around you. Give two people the same situation. One sees challenge, the other sees defeat. The difference wasn't the event, but the identity interpreting it. Identity decides your meaning, and meaning decides your movement. Identity shapes your relationship with opportunity. Opportunities don't appear because you're lucky, they appear because your mind has become prepared to recognize them. And preparation begins with identity. If you see yourself as competent, you'll notice chances to grow. If you see yourself as unworthy, you'll walk past those same chances and never realize what you missed. Identity decides whether you open the door or walk by it. Identity fuels the persistence required for achievement. Achievement is rarely quick. It requires perseverance, stamina, and belief in the unseen. Only a strong identity can sustain that kind of journey. If you see yourself as someone who follows through, you keep going. If you see yourself as someone who always stops halfway, you stop halfway. The world didn't stop you. Your identity did. Identity attracts the environment that matches it. Success begins in the mind and then expresses itself in the world. Identity creates a kind of gravitational pull. You begin gravitating toward people who match your self-concept, toward habits that reinforce your beliefs, toward environments that feel right for the person you think you are. If your identity grows, your surroundings begin to shift naturally. Identity is the hidden engine behind destiny. Destiny was a direction formed inside long before it appears outside. And identity sets that direction. A person who sees themselves as capable of growth begins walking a path that leads upward. A person who sees themselves as limited walks a path that narrows. Destiny is just identity given enough time and consistency. Achievement is identity expressed through action. Achievement not as something extraordinary, but as something inevitable when identity, thought, and action align. You think, you become, you act, and over time those actions accumulate into the shape of your life, not by chance, but by design. So, when you step back and look at your life with clear eyes, you'll notice a pattern. Every breakthrough, every setback, every change you held on to, and every change that slipped away. All of it can be traced back to the image you carried of yourself. The world may influence you, circumstances may shape you, but identity decides your direction. Not loudly, quietly, in the way you speak to yourself, in the things you attempt, in the things you avoid, in the limits you protect without even realizing it. If you want a different life, you don't begin with pressure or force. You begin with a new picture, a picture of who you are becoming. Because once your inner picture changes, your decisions change, your habits change, your expectations change, and the world slowly adjusts to match the person you're allowing yourself to be. You don't need a dramatic transformation. You don't need to become someone else. You only need to loosen your grip on the small identity that has quietly held you in place, and step into the larger one waiting beneath it. Your life will rise to meet that identity just as it always has. So hold a vision of yourself that lifts you. Let your thoughts rehearse the person you intend to be. Act in small ways that reinforce the direction you've chosen, and give yourself the patience to become someone your old identity never believed you could be. Your life cannot grow wider than the self-image that leads it. Change that image, and you change the limits of your future. Everything you want begins inside, and once the inner shift starts, the outer world has no choice but to follow.